He died in 1918. She sent Serbia an ultimatum. This document was Austria's excuse for war. It was filled with demands so extreme and insulting that Serbia could never accept them. But just in case they did, the Austrian ambassador in Belgrade was ordered to reject any reply as unacceptable. He delivered the ultimatum at 6 p.m. on the 23rd of July, 1914. Slavka Mihailovic was a Belgrade doctor.
The news of the ultimatum spread quickly, and soon there was a real alert. Streets and bars were crowded with anxious people. Everybody wondered what answer our government would give, whether a new war would be avoided.
Austria's ultimatum caught the world's diplomats napping.
The French government, the French press, and public opinion have been inconceivably surprised. Paris is almost dead. All the ambassadors but one are out of town. The Italian ambassador is in Ireland.
The Kaiser was on his yacht in Norway when the text of the Austrian ultimatum arrived.
The Kaiser arrived on deck as usual after breakfast and said to me, I was still holding the wireless message, "That's a pretty strong note for once in a while." "It certainly is," I replied, "but it means war." Whereupon the Kaiser observed that Serbia would never risk a war.
She might not have risked it on her own. But on the 24th of July, the Serbian regent, Prince Alexander, telegrammed Russia for help. In St. Petersburg, the Russian foreign minister spoke frankly to the British ambassador.
Austria would not have acted so aggressively without the consent of Germany. I hope the British government would declare itself on the side of France and Russia without delay.
Russia was convinced that Germany was warmongering. On the 26th of July, she called up her reserves. This was the second key stage of the crisis, as Britain's Foreign Secretary Edward Grey warned on the 28th.
From the moment the dispute ceases to be one between Austria-Hungary and Serbia and becomes one in which another great power is involved, it cannot but end in the greatest catastrophe that has ever befallen the continent of Europe.
Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia that same day. The first shots of the war were fired from here, the Austrian fortress of Zemun, just across the river from Belgrade. In the dead of night, Major Voja Tankasic had the Black Hand blow the only railway bridge.
Windows shattered to smithereens, and broken glass covered the floor. Patients started screaming. Then there was another explosion, and another one. So it was true. The war had begun.
How well our old city deserved the name the Turks had given her, the House of Wars. Shells fired from all sides were crisscrossing above her. The Austrians had peculiar weapons, the so-called monitors, little boats armed with heavy guns circling Belgrade like rabid dogs and firing from every direction.
It was still only a war between Austria-Hungary and Serbia. And on the 29th of July, as the shells fell on Belgrade, there was a final attempt to keep it that way. A series of last-minute telegrams flashed across Europe. Tsar to Kaiser, cousin to cousin.
Dear Willie, an ignoble war has been declared on a weak country. The indignation in Russia is enormous.
Dear Nicky, I am exerting my utmost influence on the Austrians. I confidently hope you will help me to...
Dear Willie, my troops shall not take any provocative action.
But by now, the crisis was beyond the control of monarchs or politicians. It was in the hands of the military. From the moment Russia mobilized her army, German generals knew their own clock was ticking. The alliance between France and Russia meant that Germany faced a war on two fronts. Her only hope was to deal with France in the west before the main Russian armies could invade from the east. That left no time to wait and see. For Germany, Russian mobilization meant war. Germany hadn't looked for a fight. Her generals knew a European war would be long and devastating, even for the victors. But if it was going to happen, they thought, better sooner than later.
According to all competent observation, Russia will be prepared to fight in a few years. Then she will crush us by the number of her soldiers. Then she will have built her Baltic Sea Fleet and strategic railways. Our side, meanwhile, will have grown steadily weaker.
On the 1st of August, Germany declared war on Russia. 2 days later, she declared war on Russia's ally, France. Across Europe, 10 million men headed off to fight. For all the bans and flag waving, many went unwillingly to war.
Where are we off to? France? Belgium? Or the East? At the station, people waved goodbye, some with handkerchiefs. I thought of my wife and child left alone at home. In fact, it wasn't so much a thought as a fearful shadow flitting over my soul.
God, how long is this town? My bayonet's digging in, my collar's strangling me. But when I look up, I see a pretty girl. She is so full of admiration, so moved by it all that I realize we've got to look handsome and walk tall. Off we march to the sound of shrill brass. Although where we're going, you die, you're defaced, hacked up, torn apart. All down the line, my comrades straighten up at the sight of her.
There's great excitement among my comrades. The bachelors are calm, they're even joking about it. Family men are depressed. Some are saying we'll get nothing from this war. We'll get beaten by the Germans. What's in it for us peasant soldiers? Why have we got to fight for some offended Serbs?
The leaders had little better idea why they were fighting than the men. They had no lists of war aims. Germany and Austria, Serbia, Russia and France were all convinced they were fighting a defensive war, forced on them by someone else. The only great power in Europe still on the sidelines was Britain. On the 2nd of August 1914, Britain was still at peace, but only just.
We've been in a state of great excitement as the reservists are being called up. All the railways are guarded. Everything points to the Great War, so long expected, being upon us.
But Britain was the only great power who could not claim she was the victim of aggression. Nobody had attacked her, so why should she fight? It wasn't really to defend the rights of small nations, at least not Serbia, according to the Manchester Guardian.
If it were physically possible for Serbia to be towed out to sea and sunk there, the air of Europe would at once seem cleaner.
Nor was Britain bound by treaty obligations, as the Foreign Secretary, Edward Grey, assured Parliament.
We are not parties to the Franco-Russian alliance. We do not even know the terms of the alliance.
But in private, Grey and other leaders knew that Britain had to fight. If Britain stayed neutral, the war would still threaten the country's vast empire, its global trade and security. and Britain needed to stay on friendly terms with France and Russia. Even in peacetime, she was not powerful enough to defend her empire against everyone. In Africa and India, the safety of Britain's colonies depended on French and Russian goodwill. In 1914, Britain feared her friends just as much as her enemies.
If we fail Russia now, we cannot hope to maintain that friendly cooperation with her in Asia that is of such vital importance to us.
Above all, Britain could never afford to have Europe dominated by a triumphant Germany. If Germany overran the Channel ports, Britain's control of the seas would be under threat. Prime Minister Herbert Asquith took a pragmatic view.
It is quite against British interests that France should be wiped out.
At 11 p.m. on the 4th of August, Britain declared war on Germany.
It was like awaiting the signal for the pulling of a lever which would hurl millions to their doom. The deep notes of Big Ben rang out into the night, the first strokes in Britain's most fateful hour since she arose out of the deep. Every face was suddenly contracted into a painful intensity.
It's horrible to think of all the suffering which may follow our mobilization. I suppose the less one thinks of it, the better.
We never talk of death and very seldom think much about it. It's when everyone is asleep and you are awake that sometimes you look into the future and wonder.
The British government had a war book listing all that had to be done in an emergency. The country's leaders knew war would be a long and painful struggle, a slow, grinding process of blockade, of starving the enemy out. But most civilians had no idea what they were getting into. Across Europe, there was a run on the banks. The war couldn't last longer than a year, the French finance minister told a British general, because the money to pay for it would run out. Most people expected Britain, with the largest navy in the world, to fight a sea war. The Foreign Secretary reassured the nation.
For us, with a powerful fleet, which we believe able to protect our commerce, to protect our shores, and to protect our interests, if we are engaged in war, we shall suffer but little more than we shall suffer if we stand aside.
Bert Fielder was a sergeant in the Royal Marines. He reassured his wife.
My dear Nell, I don't think this war is going to be half as bad as people expect it to be. You see, it's not a hard job for England, so there's no need to worry yourself. As long as I can keep you informed as to where I am, it'll all be all right.
But the weapons with which the world went to war were so new that few had ever been fired in anger. Countries were armed with battleships and submarines less than 10 years old. Nobody really knew how to use them. All the European powers had been stockpiling new artillery, machine guns, explosive shells. But none had fought a major war in Europe for over 40 years. The crisis had begun in the Balkans. And as the Austrians faced up to the Serbs, the First World War started here as it would go on everywhere else. A war in which old scores would be settled and the rule book thrown away.
The war is taking us into a country inhabited by a population inspired with fanatical hatred towards ourselves. An attitude of extreme severity, extreme harshness, and extreme distrust is to be observed towards everybody.
In some sectors, Serbian civilians did fight a guerrilla war, not in uniform, not in the regular army. It was hard for the Austrians to tell who was a real enemy, who was not.